Okay, so the first thing I thought about was some follow-up.
Right.
So our follow-up is, what is our relationship? I thought I would ask you, how long have you known me? Because I've only known you for since I basically became aware of myself, which is probably 12 or 13, right? 11, 12, that age. So
Right.
I don't know how old you were, or I haven't thought
So
about it.
there's a personal history that basically disrupts my relationship with you, and that was basically at one time we lived in the same little town in Oregon named Klamath Falls. I grew up there until I was about 10, right?
Hmm.
But the thing is that like your mother had you basically right as we were moving away. And so I got to see you when you were an infant and, when you were 3 years old. But even like the small personality quirks of an infant were not really something that like I got to experience,
Yeah.
right? And the thing is yeah, you said it basically. That at some point people become like self-aware and their personality starts establishing it, who they are and what they're like and everything like that. And of course we had like the family get-togethers and everything like that. But like my friendship with you really started, I think, more when you were starting to be a teenager, and like we ended up sharing common interests of like fantasy books, magic cards.
Right. For those who don't really know, Magic the Gathering is like a really popular card game that's been around for a really long time. And I took an interest to it probably about 10 or 11 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I've played a while longer than that. Like it came out in 1994, and I think I played in 1995. So I've been with it for pretty much the game's history.
No, you're old.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, like and really like we've always kind of come from like a very sort of family that was sort of intellectually conflicted, and so we end up having like these sort of intellectual discussions about like life, liberty, religion.
Do you mean internally conflicted?
I think the fact that we're all a little bit rebellious against like
The man.
well, just being told what to think. Like we want to have our own sort of like
Definitely. Yeah.
uh,
Our own opinions, for sure.
yeah, and the sort of the establishment of like, okay, why do I think like that? It's like it's fine that mom thinks that we should be good people and not steal or do this certain ways or act in certain ethical ways.
Right. We don't like the whole argument of it's against the law. That baffles me every time because you're like, okay, so what? Like that doesn't really tell you if it's a moral choice or not, and that's way more important to me. Okay, so other topic that I wanted to talk about. Do you know that I have made kind of like a anti-Facebook proclamation?
I did see that.
Okay, like through Christina, because you obviously don't have a Facebook.
Yeah, I've never really been caught up into the whole social media self-validation sort of thing. I think it's a really great sharing tool, but at some point, you've had enough food porn to last you a lifetime.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at. Well, okay, so there's a problem. I made a blog post and I basically got my website running so that I could make this post about how I'm really not going to use Facebook anymore. Here are the main reasons why I don't want to use it. There are tons of other reasons why somebody probably shouldn't use Facebook. I made a couple of, like I said, it's a time waster and it distracts you from your work. That's like the main things. Not to mention whether
It
Facebook is
can.
like
I
evil
mean,
or not. But yeah, okay, it can. It does. Not that it can. Of course, it can, but it does. Okay.
well,
Here's the thing. Either you kind of use it and you use it on a daily basis and you're very informed about what's going on, or you kind
right.
of use it on like when you think about it basis, and then you don't get to see everything.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, it's kind of awkward because it falls into that social media of like, well, I sent you an email. Well, did you check your email messages? Because then you start to lose that sort of personal connection. If like if somebody's trying to connect with you through email and you don't really check your email messages, then you've kind of defeated that form of communication as far as like relationships. And the same thing with like Facebook and like MySpace previous is that like if you don't keep up with it, you might miss the fact that like someone wants to have a get together for like a card party or something like that in a month's time.
Right, and I do understand that, and so like that's like I may be missing out on some of that, but like it was distracting me. It like obviously it doesn't do that for everybody, but it was because it wasn't like a whole like it wasn't really a problem, but I just noticed it enough to where I was like, I want to change this about myself. I don't want to be dopamine addicted to Facebook, and because you're like when you check something without knowing you even checked it at all, that's a dopamine addiction. Like there's no doubt.
Well, I mean, there are certain addictions, and the internet can be very addictive. But I mean, I have a very firm opinion about distractions, which is that really you have to have some matter of self-discipline. Otherwise, really, I mean, is Facebook distracting you? Or are you allowing yourself to be distracted? It's really a fact that you don't have the self-control in the sense that you're allowing yourself to be distracted. Now, there is a natural human element to that, right? If like a garbage truck suddenly flips over outside your house window, you're obviously going to look outside the window because that's like a loud and sort of attention getting format. So there's like it's kind of like the deer in headlights or the human sees an accident on the car. Humans can't help but look at the car accident, even though that's a distraction that they really can't afford. You need to pay attention to what you're doing on the road. Sort of like it's a very human thing to be distracted. But the fact is that ultimately, I think the way that we use our language to describe, oh, that person distracted me, or Facebook distracted me, or something else basically distracted, allows you to basically shift the responsibility externally when really it's internal.
That's really what I'm trying to avoid, right? I'm trying to avoid, hey, this
Yeah,
distracted me from my work, even in a personal way, like work that I
yeah,
want to work on. So, okay, here's the problem. That's fine. And actually, I haven't like deleted it or anything. I just basically removed it from my bookmarks, and I haven't been checking it.
yeah. Which is if it's a different kind of self-discipline. It's like, taking the IV out of
Or yeah.
if you're hooked on it, something, you're just like, you gotta unplug, man.
There's two issues. The reason, like pretty much the main reason why I didn't do it sooner is because Facebook has this really useful thing, which is that all of or most of the people in your life who you would want to invite to something
Yeah.
are going to be on there and see an event notification that says, hey, Grant wants you to come to his house for a party, or so and so wants me to come to their house for a party. And that's a really, really valuable tool. But I would really like it if people send me a message or an email instead, because that I will see that. And
Yeah, it's definitely more personable.
yeah, and I want my relationships to be maybe a little more meaningful than Facebook has to offer, where I want you to think of me. I want you to be like, who am I missing from this list? Oh, that's right. Grant doesn't really check his Facebook, so I have to message him. Like, I would like that extra step. If I'm not that meaningful to you, then, like, obviously we have to work on our relationship.
That's true. I mean, a lot of people basically do it easy, and there is a sort of thing of like, there's a value in Facebook in the sense that like there is a presence in the sense that like almost everybody uses it. So it is a way to like keep connections for like, maybe people that live across state lines or things like that. Now I don't have a Facebook account, as you know, which is actually very atypical for what I've seen like for the people that I associate
Yeah,
with.
I would say it's pretty atypical for Americans.
Yeah. I can't speak to the people on the East Coast, but like here on the West Coast, I don't know. Like it seems like a very much, sort of thing. Like almost everybody has it. I mean, like, grandmas have it, sort of thing. Um,
Not our grandma. Not my grandma, anyway.
yeah, I don't know if mom does or not. Anyway, the thing that I really like about it, and I kind of wish that this would happen more often, but unfortunately it sort of degrades into those sort of like Reddit posts that have been like, that are mushy and people repost, and it's sort of like it's not like original production is, and that's fine to some degree, but like
That's
I
another
don't know.
reason I left. Oh man, I hate that
Yeah,
shit.
it is really bad. But we have a couple of coworkers, for instance, who we have one coworker who does it in a way to basically sort of passively address political issues that they feel are important.
I have seen that a little bit, but most of my friends who are political are pretty active. Like they'll post something not passively. They'll be like, "Please talk to me about this. I would like to discuss this. Let's think about this in a meaningful way." I'm lucky that I have friends like that. Passively doing it or passive aggressively doing it isn't
Well,
good.
it's not. Yeah, she's not really aggressive or passively aggressive. What she'll do is she'll post a video and be like, "I really agree with this sort of cause, and I wanted to share a video that I watched about it," and that's what the video will be about. It's one of those things where, like, if you've seen sort of the transformation of, like, the home where, like, people were sort of forced to, like, pioneer days, leaving like this small little hut where everybody like was in tune with what everybody was doing pretty much at all hours of the day, and the only way to escape that was to escape your tiny one bedroom hut that you shared with your five brothers and sisters and mom and dad, sort of thing.
Hmm.
And then you kind of got into, distractive America, where, you had like the TV that kind of like usurped a little bit of the sharing time that families would have. And now there are certain families that when they sit around their houses and their computer and laptops are sitting on the lap, sometimes they'll basically go through the external declaration of like, "Oh, I really like this website. I wanted to share it with you guys. Like, you should check this out." And maybe, you share your laptop screen with the person sitting on the couch with you, right?
Right. Hmm.
But a lot of times that's not really happening, like, nowadays, right? And it's like a lot of the political correctness that goes in the office space is that people aren't really sharing about themselves. It's very formulaic and very,
Overly professional.
yeah, like to the point of like, not really being very human. It's like dehumanizing the sort of
Hmm.
professionalism that we go through. And so I don't mind some of the Facebook sharing, but
Right. Well, okay, so the main reason I brought this up at all is because, well, I want my friends to know about this podcast and I want them to see my blog posts. So I think right around once a week, I'm going to make like a post and then not really look at it. So maybe I'm not like using Facebook for its intended purpose. If somebody else were doing the same method, I probably wouldn't see their post. But I think I'm just going to shout into the void.
why? Well, you're sort of utilizing like the mainstream. There's views to be had on Facebook from the connectivity that people have, and we'll see. But the only thing about that is that you also, if you want to shout into the void, you also cut off possible feedback.
Oh, well, I'll probably look at the feedback. Hey, if you're going to leave some feedback, please go to my website where there's a post for this podcast and leave a comment there. Or you can leave a rating in the iTunes store. And please don't just rate it 5 stars. Rate it what you think, unless it's 1 star or 2.
We're gonna perpetuate rage rating. I'm rating you a 1. It's gonna happen.
Okay, so you sent me this last night, and I think I saw it on Reddit or I saw it somewhere. I saw it on YouTube before you sent it to me, but you sent it to me last night, and it's worth talking about because it's pretty funny. It's Americans using a bidet.
Yep.
And my favorite part of that whole entire video was the guy who, like, he like looks confused at first, and then he's like, "This is fantastic." Okay, and then it cuts away to like somebody else being like, "Oh no," or like, and then another guy being like, "Yeah, this is good," and then like it goes back to him, and he's like, he says it again. He's like, "This is fantastic." It's so good.
Yeah, they did a really good job. Me and Christina, who is my long-term partner, we went on like a BuzzFeed video binge last night of like listening to like all the things that Americans have not experienced, or Australians and experiencing snow for the first time,
Oh my god.
or what happens if you carbonate pickle juice and then have to drink it, that sort of thing.
What is that?
Yeah,
What?
they have a BuzzFeed video has like a thing where like they use like the soda machine. Like there's sort of like you know how like they have the craft coffee now that you can buy the Koenig like craft coffee where they have the little Starbucks cups or the little Koenig cups and
Yeah.
you just like thing and you have your espresso sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
So there was sort of also the whole movement at the same time, and this is happening right now, where you can basically create your own soda drink. So if you want to like create
Oh yeah. Okay.
your health blender or your fruit juice thing, and you really want to have kind of like a soda, you can just carbonate it and have pineapple juice soda. That's if that's what you want to do.
It sounds pretty good. I bet it kind of, there's probably like an initial investment. You have to buy the machine or whatever.
Right. Well, they had like they did coffee and they did milk, which people apparently really disliked, and I can't imagine drinking milk that is like soda. That just seems really wrong
No,
to me.
doesn't sound good.
But yeah.
Well, you know that carbonation, it's actually like, so the reason soda tastes terrible when it's flat is because carbonation has like an element of sour to it.
Well, it definitely kind of has a taste. What's interesting is that I actually do not like my soda overly carbonated. Like I don't like it completely flat, but if it's been sitting somewhere for like an hour, that's like my prime. I feel like it's like wine. You got to let it breathe or something. Be like, I can't touch my Mountain Dew yet. It hasn't been enough time.
You and my mom both. Oh, just in case the listeners didn't realize, we have in common a relative. That your sister and my mom are the same person.
Oh no, I was waiting for the Star Wars. Luke, I am your father. Yeah, no, that's not the case.
No.
I am Grant's uncle.
Right.
I have the what is it, the distinguished honor.
Distinguished honor, yeah. So my mom does the same thing where she like has a cup of soda, and she will pour it high up into the thing so it fizzes extra on the way down to get rid of some of the carbonation. I'm like, Mom, what are you doing?
Well, that's why I was like, I'm very partial to ice in my soda. It's like, obviously I don't want it watered down, but soda does a really good job of initially getting rid of that initial fizz. So
Oh, with ice, you mean?
yeah.
No, I'd rather just like have the soda pre-refrigerated. Out of a can is my favorite.
Yeah. Okay, well let's go back to the bidet thing. Like,
Okay. So anyway,
we're watching the thing is that okay? So Grant has talked to me many times, and it's still sort of a thing that's back in his mind. And I think that if the opportunity ever comes by his way, I think that he will choose to make this move, which is that you have talked about your desire to possibly live in Europe.
oh yes, I thought you were going to end this with Grant will someday buy a bidet. I was like,
Well,
what?
the fact is that
Really?
if you live in Europe, you might be getting a bidet much sooner than the rest of us.
Yeah, well,
And the question is whether or not I would sit on the toilet and be like, "Oh, this is fantastic." You know?
I think I would. I would at least want to try a bidet, and I would totally make the quote unquote sacrifice of having a bidet to live in Europe. That would be like a cost that I would gladly pay. Okay,
You see it as a cost. You'd be like, "Well,
Maybe.
this flat, on the river is open, but you have to have a bidet in your apartment." You'd be like, "Okay, I guess I'll have to take it."
yeah. Well, I'm not sure if it would be a cost or not, just because I've never used one. I'm totally open to the idea of it.
what freaks me about, okay, so natural part of growing up in life, you rent for a time, you try to get out of the house after college or whatever your circumstances might be, but you might try to buy a home, and me and Christine are rather new home buyers. So that's some back information for you all. So what I think about when I see the bidet is like, okay, obviously there's some electricity there. There's some pressurized plumbing. How hard would it be to make a home improvement, do-it-yourself repair on this bidet?
I bet it wouldn't be too hard because they probably, when you order one, it probably has everything to convert a standard American toilet into a bidet. I'm sure there are instructions online.
I actually don't think that you can convert toilets because it is a pressure. You need the water to
I imagine that there's some kind of system in the bidet that does that.
Yeah, well, you saw the video where they had the little tube that comes out of the back.
Oh yeah. No, I've seen other bidet videos too, and I know how they work.
Yeah, I just don't know if you could drill through porcelain to add an attachment to your toilet.
Oh no, you misunderstand me. Okay, so I'm saying you completely remove the American toilet and replace it with a bidet. Yeah. The system is going to be in there to do the pressurized thing. I wouldn't want to DIY bidet. That would not be a good experience.
Somebody comes to use your toilet. You got some duct tape in the back of the thing that holds a little hose. You'd be like, lovely.
No, that is not something you want.
Well, they're popular. They're very popular in Japan, and of course, I think it's great that BuzzFeed does videos on bras and toiletries because so much of the world has a toilet taboo, which just drives me nuts. I'm just like, guys, it's okay to talk about crap, especially if you're going to be we're going to dispose of it without it being in your backyard, or you won't have to smell it, you won't have to experience the caustic nature of poo and urine. Of course you're totally willing to talk about that if you can get rid of it. So go have the conversation.
Pro-toilet.
Yeah, I'm totally pro-toilet.
So you were trying to bring up with the bidet. We kind of got sidetracked, but you were trying to bring up that I want to go to Europe. I want to basically live in Europe, and I think I've wanted that. I've realized that I wanted that since high school.
Yeah.
Right. And this is actually. I decided this in high school, and people would be like, okay, yeah, whatever. Kids say stuff all the time, and people kind of don't take them seriously.
It's true. We don't have that really in our family, though. That's something that's kind of unique about,
what is?
If Marissa said something when she was 17 or 16, I would have to take her serious.
I would too, right.
Marissa's now 24, I think.
Okay, Marissa is my cousin, and so there are 3 children. I think of it as above me, right? There's my mom. There is Ben, who I'm talking to right now, and then there is my Aunt Brenda. So Ben is my uncle, and then I've got my Aunt Brenda. My Aunt Brenda is a little bit older than my mom, and she had 2 kids, one of which is my cousin Marissa. So yes, I would also take Marissa seriously if she said something like that. I don't know if anybody did, but I still, I haven't changed my mind since then about going to Europe.
What made you think, what was the initial sort of thing in your head, that sort of drove you to be attracted towards maybe moving out sort of American culture?
American culture.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate.
That's okay. So
at the time, though, you were definitely going through also sort of how our culture dealt with sort of religious aspects. I think that was also another sort of consideration.
Right, being dissatisfied with that. It was, and because in Europe it's treated a little bit differently. It's treated a little more. I think it's treated a little more personally, and it's a home thing. It's not something you shout out on the streets. Well, I don't know if any of you live in America, but it's kind of something that you can't avoid. And
there's definitely sort of the sort of proselytizing that really is very common in American culture, where
proselytizing. I don't know that word. I'm gonna look that up.
but it's kind of like the message of "Go tell it on the mountain." So,
Yeah.
and also you have like
Convert
basically,
or attempt to convert people. Yeah, yeah. That's okay. So like that's my experience in high school. Is like I was in a small town, like Ben was saying earlier, and yeah, it was really in my face, and I was tired of it. That probably wasn't the main reason I wanted to move, though. It really, I think it was like,
well, you had your bumps with the American school system too, sort of like the injustice and the fact that there was a sort of a lack of ideals over policy.
yes, I did have many problems there, and that's actually something I should tell someday in a podcast. I'm gonna write that down.
Talk about in the future your experience with the American, yeah, because we both had like different experiences with the public education system, and
Not great ones. Yeah.
no, and so we both lean outside of like sort of the classic public education system in America, and I think that there are a lot of good things about I would not regret having my future children like be students in sort of a European school district.
Right. Okay. So like I kind of realized that, and heard a lot of arguments, of course, of, oh, the grass is always greener. People saying that like it's not actually any better over there; it's just different. And I think that's probably true. But I think that enough things that I would want to be different are. I'm not saying like the school systems over there are even necessarily like that much better. I'm not
Well, I think the
saying.
personal culture is like different, like what you're saying, like basically the way that people, um, you know, treat personal aspects versus professional aspects versus
Right. I don't
like
think anybody would be opposed to opening up to you if you were asking. I don't think it's like that private. And it depends on the area. As one of the other main reasons is because if I were to move over there, I am so close to so many different cultures in a small area.
yeah, it's definitely one of the attraction. I mean, there's so much like it's just such a density of like history and like different culture, like you're saying, and yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like, one of the first civilizations, right? Because like the humans started basically in Africa and moved up.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Well,
I
there's
think
a lot of cultures that don't really exist like in their formative stages. Like the early cultures of Egypt, kind of got toppled at when Alexander the Great like took over Egypt, and then it moved to Ptolemaic society up until Rome basically had the final collapse of the Egyptian culture.
hmm
Mesopotamian went the same way, where it was a very sort of Arabic culture was completely different before the Muslim and the
movement,
rise of Islam, in
hmm
like the 700s.
right,
So like as far as like culture, like European culture has changed, since basically the fall of the Roman Empire. From feudal societies versus what we have now, which is more of a democratic society. So I'm sure in Europe that's pretty pronounced because that they have a lot more history there.
right, and that's interesting to me, and also just the fact that like I've always really felt the travel bug. That's from my mom. She has that too. So it's multiple things led me to the point of like realizing from maybe not an early age, but from being young that like I don't really fit in America as well as most people. I'm wanting to try something else. There's no way to know unless you do try something else. I could always,
Yeah.
if I retain my American citizenship, which I may or may not do, then I can always come back. But I am very interested in it, at least visiting for an extended stay.
Yeah. So that you just have to figure out the means by which you would do so.
Right, which is basically money. You can obviously do it for cheap.
It's kind of like when a lot of people, do Europe, they like definitely look at the hostile and the backpacking, but that's not really. I don't think that's really our methodology for how we'd approach it. If we wanted to move to Europe, we'd probably be looking for either an already established independent income, or a job that you could take in like Norway, Sweden, England.
Right. Well, part of the problem also is like getting citizenship in certain places is difficult.
Yeah, you can't do it. You can't do it in Switzerland, and I don't know how hard it is in Sweden. And
I'm a few years away, but needless to say that I definitely want to go.
see, this is all coming back to the fact that a bidet is in your future.
Actually, it's more
It's more common in
impactful.
Japan, but
I might experience one at some point. I look forward to that moment. So it's actually been more impactful to me than just thinking about a bidet, believe it or not. So, people, I don't know if people take me seriously. I've told people for like years, and people who've only known me for a year, they might hear me mention it in a conversation and kind of be like nobody says shit like that. Like they don't really say, yeah, I want to move to Europe in the next 5 years. Like nobody, I've never heard that from anybody. I've heard, oh, I want to travel.
yeah.
But nobody really, like, declares it that strongly. So I don't know if I'm taken seriously.
Well, I think a lot of that falls short in the sense that people don't really evaluate like really large things in their life. They just kind of get by, and it's kind of like the big picture versus the small picture sort of thing.
Yeah.
If you have your connections in your life right now, and you have a job right now, or you have like a school, and a lot of people are not willing to make the break of saying, okay, I finished college, or I finished my schooling, or I have an independent income with like blogging, writing, or some sort of art that I get through DeviantArt. I mean, there's a lot of people are establishing independent incomes now through the internet, but they're not willing to make the break of saying, you know what, I really think that like I'd really like to experience a different culture and maybe move to Argentina. They're like, and be like, well, you break away from your family and be like, well, the world's like a smaller place. I can always fly back. And the thing is that like we can still have very personable conversations through Skype, like we do here. Like our family is spread out all on the West Coast. I'm currently living in the Seattle area. Grant is currently living in the Portland area. Our Aunt Brenda lives in L.A. We have family in like Idaho. And the thing is that like, why not move to Argentina, or why not move to Europe?
There's no reason not to. And this is actually one of the things I wanted to bring up, is that it's been a problem in my past romantic relationships. I don't think you've ever known that. In a couple of my past relationships.
I guess I can kind of see that, like, where are you going in your long-term future? You want to move to Europe? I can't possibly make that sort of change.
One person I definitely got that response from was like, why? Like, why not? Was really, my response.
Well, I wonder if it ties into the whole thing of like how people treat it. Like some people definitely are like, have the belief in the mythical one. Oh, this is the one for you, like now that I've met my significant other, and this is the one, like I can't possibly move away from Washington State, because then I would be destined to be alone forever if I lived in Sweden, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, the thing is that usually it would be great. I mean, obviously, and I kind of like, I don't know how Maggie is right now. Like, Maggie's okay moving to Europe, right?
For anybody listening who doesn't know me, Maggie's my long-term partner. Yeah, it would be a really big problem if she wasn't, because I am going to move there. Like, there's no question in my mind of like whether or not I'm going to. It's really a question of like timing and money, like cost.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously we've talked about it, and yeah. No, she's on board with moving around the world, and she's got the travel bug as well. So yeah, she was interested in visiting South America. I don't think she's that interested in living there in a permanent way. I am interested in living in Europe in a permanent way, but I'm totally okay with, like, if we go to Chile for 3 years. That sounds great.
See, Okay, so my long-term partner, Christina, she was not really interested in moving outside of Washington State because she really loves the flora and fauna. I guess. Just like she really likes the fact that we have snow-capped mountains, we have ocean. You can go over to sort of an arid steppe desert if you so desire.
Oregon's like that too.
Yeah, Oregon is very much like that. It's one of the, but the thing is that what's interesting is that like for people who are listening in other states or in other countries, is that sometimes if you're stuck in North Dakota like has some hills and some mountains and everything like that, but you can live in an area where nothing is going to change if you drive 300 miles in any direction, pretty much. And Washington and Oregon are one of the few states where you can travel 50 miles in any direction and get like a completely different experience from.
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that like I really enjoy about Oregon. It's one of the reasons I've never said that like I would not come back, was because I really do like Oregon, and like the US has some really valuable things to it besides like just scenery, not just scenery, but like
Yeah.
culture wise and policy wise. There are some things that are very valuable about American policy.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that like I think I'll probably end up staying in the United States is just because of its ties to individuality. Now, I think that we overrate our individuality a little bit high in the sense that, like, really people are more social and we're more community based, and we tend to follow the flock a lot. I mean, everybody gets on their bandwagons, but there's a wagon. Everybody gets on it, that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like a myth. It's like the individuality myth of America is sort of a thing.
So, should we get to our topic?
Well, like I said, I was gonna let the topic be whatever it was gonna be today.
I think I want to. It doesn't have to be this way, Obviously, we'll have other things to talk about, and I would like to have a topic as a backup in case we do come to a dead end or whatever. So today's topic, we both decided.
Yeah, we talked about it before.
Right, we said that it would be our personal obsessions. Now, I kind of think our personal obsessions are related in a way. I'll get to that. I know, you're like, huh? Okay, so, but I suggested to Ben, we should have one of our topics be about your obsession of World War II. And I kind of said it, tongue-in-cheek, and
Yeah.
that it's his obsession. And so Ben sent right back to me. He's like, well, then we should talk about your obsession too, because I have an obsession with Harry Potter.
Yeah.
So I think the way our obsessions are the same is that we both really believe that the thing we're obsessed over has impacted culture really meaningfully.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think ours both have. Obviously, I grew up with Harry Potter. And,
Yeah, I use mine more as like a reference marker of like how culture has changed and
Right. So I wanted to ask you like the main one or two things that it really impacted, because I actually, I'll hear clips of your thoughts come into conversations randomly, and you'll be like, World War II this. You sound like, an old historian teacher or something.
Yeah, it's sort of like a big joke in the family, just because inevitably, like, if we start getting into
Another reason I wanted to do it on podcast one.
If we get into any sort of discussion, I like to basically have some historical context for the way people are now, because like there's a very sort of like Americana. This is another part of like I dislike about Americana, but it's very true, is that we are so like culturally isolated in our own sort of culture. Like if you were to live in Europe and you lived like somewhere between the German or Czechoslovakia border, you would see castles and everything that were left over there from the Holy Roman Empire, or their struggles with Austrian Hungary, that sort of thing. And it's just like there's times like in Europe where you can basically be this is part of Germany or this is part of France or it was part of Belgium at one point. Like
Yeah,
things
that's weird.
change. Yeah, but the thing is that like with Americana, like so much of our culture is popular culture. What's been done in the last 20 years? It's like why we obsess so much over our celebrities and Justin Bieber and Kim Kardashian and like Paris Hilton. It just
Speaking of
drives
the
me
names.
nuts. Yeah,
Speaking
no
of the
kidding.
names.
I know, but it's like a very frustrating cultural trait that's very true about Americans. And so
Yeah.
I tend to when I start talking about like perspectives, I'll basically break it into like, what our culture is doing now, what we were doing in the 60s, and then inevitably it goes back to like, the post-World War years, the 50s, and then what were we doing previous between the Civil War and World War II. So inevitably, like, and a lot of our way that we basically treat foreign policy and global policy is also basically demarcated by like our introduction as like a global power out of World War II. And then there's the sort of like, like we, right now, the Western Gregorian calendar is based upon the birth of Christ, and we've tried to like sort of rewrite the history and basically say, okay, well, before Ante Domini and like before Christ or after Christ sort of thing. Like
AD
moved,
BC. Is that
right.
what you're talking about?
We've decided that we're going to get away with that. We're going to make it not about Jesus Christ because we're going to say that it's like, oh, the common era, before the common era or after the common era. But the thing is that, year one is still dated to, when Jesus was like 33 years of age or something like that. So it's kind of frustrating that like that is like the demarcation of our calendar. And I've always really loved sci-fi programs where they're like the year of the calendar is the day they made the aliens. That's the new date on the calendar. Or
The time that like the aliens came to
right.
Yeah.
Or one of the book series, new calendar demarcation. We're going to start counting every year from now on, from the day that we first landed our first terraformer on Mars. That's going to be the start of the new calendar.
Okay, so I got a thought experiment for you. So this is something that so I listened to this other podcast called Hello Internet. I really recommend it. There will be a link in the show notes. So I've listened to their whole series, and he talks about a thought experiment where if basically a button where if you press the button, it would delete history.
Okay.
So like it'd get rid of the history books. Everybody would like forget maybe like you'd remember 5 years ago, but you wouldn't remember beyond that.
Right. Okay.
And he was saying, would that be beneficial to society?
My gosh.
I know this
totally
is
have
gonna
an
kill
opinion
you.
about this. I totally have an opinion about
I
this.
knew this would kill you because you who are such a history buff and you the culture impacts. So his argument that like he thinks he would press it because I think this is like I would have to think about it for longer, but he thinks he would press it because basically there are cultural impacts that are negative, and if we started from basically zero with the technology we had now and with the ability to basically bring people out of poverty that we have and medicine that we have now, we have everything we have now. We still have like the internet and everything.
Right, we might be able to get we might be able to move finally to sort of a post-racial culture if we didn't have this sort of stigma of
exactly. And he was talking about where he was visiting the States. He's an expat who lives in the UK. And he was talking about a visit with his family, and he went through a rather large Indian reservation, and he said, he's traveled a lot of places, but he's never seen poverty like that. And it's something that normally the U.S. would never allow. But because of this weird relationship between Native Americans and
our government,
our government, that like they kind of let this happen. So his argument was that like, yeah, exactly, post-racial society at least probably, because like there's no real reason to be racist or sexist, and if we didn't have any basis for like why, then it would go away much quicker. So there's a lot of value in story and like our history as like a society. I think that's very valuable, but it's hard to know whether I press a button.
Right. So I think that's a very valued argument, and especially if you were to start out where everybody pretty much retained their personality as of today, because we don't really. There's a lot of people who historically may have been very overtly sexist or overtly racist, who now are, just have sort of passive problems where, they might, this is very common with gender roles, is that they're like totally understanding if a woman stays home, but if a guy stayed home, they might be like, oh well, that's odd, but very very more so like in the previous years and generations, we had much more firmly established gender roles. But okay, this is I guess the reason that I don't think that I would be so quick to push the button is because I think that human culture takes a really long time to mature. And I think I've talked to this about you, but I tend to I talk about it with different people, is that how many hundreds or thousands of years does it basically take to have the average sort of mob mentality of the human race sort of progress like a year? Like if you think about like the medieval ages, it was all about gaining advantage and asserting status. And if you go back 1,000 years previous, it was all about this is mine, no, this is mine. It was very like resource, people were fighting over resources, like 2-year-olds or something like that, and it'd be like, no, that's my toy truck. Be like, no, like, I'm the one who controls this gold mine. You can't have it, or
right.
And we sort of moved to like, we still do that nowadays, but now it's like, no, I have a deed to the gold mine. It's like, it's more diplomatic, right? We're still basically.
I like your posh
inside,
voice.
like, the 2-year-old. We're still the 2-year-old of this is mine, but we've moved to more of a diplomatic stance versus like just fighting over it, and so. It's like, okay, so I don't know how many thousands or hundreds of years it takes us to basically advance, like basically sort of a year. But if we had to like gauge the average maturity level of where we are right now, I think we're, the human race seems kind of like an 18-year-old, 19-year-old to me, where we're completely self-absorbed, and like we think that we're so wonderful and we're so great, and we have none of the problems of the previous generations. It's like, but we've kind of got over a little bit of our squabbling stage, or maybe the sort of the prissing and preening of the, like the sort of Renaissance, where we're just like, oh, do my curls lay flat? We're not wearing those gigantic wigs anymore.
I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced we're over that.
Right. Well, it's like some people don't really get out of that stage, and obviously we're still very much, interested in beautiful people as our sort of icons, which is kind of disturbing if you're thinking about like, what kind of personality they have. But anyway, so it's like, what is the collective age of the mob? How old is it? And how many more years are we going to have to take until we get into our mid-20s?
You think erasing that would not be a beneficial thing?
Well, I do have like an example where I think we kind of pressed the button in one topic, and I think that would be monogamy.
Oh.
Polygamy was very common in Western culture at one point, right?
Yeah.
But then whatever was bad about polygamy versus monogamy, like the pros and cons between each sort of social relationship, was pretty much buried under religious dogma going from the fall of the Roman Empire, right? Where, like, whatever, we pretty much moved to a monoganistic society, and like adultery became like an evil, and like we definitely had like set things. Now I think that human jealousy and fidelity are real issues, so I don't think that like polygamy is just the answer to everything. But whatever lessons there were to be had of why monogamy is the true and, superior system has been lost because we buried it under this religious dogma. Like, we didn't actually
You might be
have
blowing
reasons.
some people's minds right now. I'm just letting you know.
I'm just saying this is that, like, there might be some real legitimate reasons why monogamy is the superior social system for personal, like, very attached relationships. But whatever those reasons are, somebody pushed the fucking button.
And said it was like, oh, it's illegal now.
Well, they basically said God decrees that monogamy is the superior social relationship. It is like, it's kind of like, the things that, we haven't talked about it yet, but we've sort of implied that we have definite views on marriage in the sense that you have a long-term partner and I don't, and I have a long-term partner, but they're not, we're not married.
Right. So other people my age are getting married all around me, and I'm kind of, I definitely, we can talk about this on another time, because I think we could have a whole conversation about marriage.
Dude, just give it a little back, Dad, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think marriage is like particularly important for me at least right now, and I don't think it would impact very much of my life.
And establishing my own personal background, Christina and I have been together 10 years, and everybody looks at us like, why aren't you married? And it's actually very frustrating when you deal with sort of Western culture in the way that we treat marriage, because if I say girlfriend, people don't take it seriously. It's like it's harder to get some things done, like when it comes to like doing bills and like everything else. And so it's a very frustrating process.
There's another issue where if you, so you can't get bills done, and there's like tax issues that you have. There's also another issue where you're like, okay, girlfriend isn't taken seriously. If you say partner and you don't say her name or you don't say her, then people will assume you're gay, and that's at the moment in Western culture, that's like not something that is impactless. So, like, if people think you're gay, they will treat you differently, sometimes in a negative way.
It's a demographic. It's like, okay, you have if you imply that you're gay or you say you're gay, you're going to have like a 30 to 40% chance, depending on the area you're in, to basically get either negative feedback or even a carte blanche. Oh, you're a wonderful person because you're gay. Like that. Is sort of that's the other way the pendulum's swinging right now. Is that either you're a wonderful person because you're gay, which is like totally doesn't make any sense. It's like the same thing with like why you'd be a bad person if you're gay. No, having gay has no impact on whether you're a good or bad person.
Right.
Although I have to say that like my own experience with gay people is that they tend to be very good and very nice, and like I tend to like them a little bit more than religious people that I've met.
Yes,
so as far as like
I'm totally with you.
As far as being morally attuned, I've had better experiences with the gay and lesbian community.
That's why I tend to. I mean, girlfriend also doesn't feel right for me because like
it's a more committed relationship.
It is. It's not. We've been together for like 2.5 years, and it's not like a maybe end it in 6 months. It's
like if you go back to like sort of the establishing monogamy thing, there's sort of the relationship vested by God, sort of thing. Like that's like how we buried it. That's how we pushed the button. And now if you basically say we're a partnership, and also the whole thing of like the way the Western culture is sort of done sort of religious obligation and like inserted that into marriage now, where like somehow the way that we've treated marriage with marriageable vows is like one of those things where like it's a source of obligation where now you're going to be it's a relationship of mutual enslavement where you have certain expectations.
Yes,
and now if you break
it does happen that way.
If you break those expectations, the relationship is over or it's broken. You're just like, fucking people make mistakes, like, and people like also change as they grow, and like it's just like, where did this thing come from? Why do we have this social culture? And it's all kind of like the sort of thing of like, did we push the button on this issue?
Yeah, and I do think we probably did, because I know that it is a thing that Well, okay, so I want
And I
to
think a lot
bring
of
up
that has
something.
been happened is religious dogma has buried a lot of that sort of like stuff and
In
pushing the
Western
button.
culture, I
Yeah.
think you're right about that. But do you know that in most countries today, it's legal to have polygamy?
I had no idea. No.
Yeah. And so in most countries, as in more than half, right now, polygamy is totally legal.
It's actually good to know because at the same time, like people tend to choose monogamy.
Right, they do tend to choose monogamy. I think, at least, I mean, what I'm exposed to, what I've been exposed to, like that seems to be the
Well, it's
case.
like the family structures, like India, China, many places in Africa. Although I guess a lot of places do
I
have
might
like
be totally wrong, by the way, but we're gonna find out.
I guess a lot of times they'll have multiple wives and
Like
some
polyamory.
some African countries, but
Okay, I might be totally off base on this. I don't know. This is part of how the human brain works. You're like, oh, that's definitely a thing. I'm sure. And then like you go and check, and you're like, wow, it's way off. Okay, so here, polygamy generally, we're going to count places that are polygamy generally illegal, but it's practiced not fully criminalized. So like basically the state's like, whatever.
yeah, not an
Okay,
important issue, right?
right. And then
Kind of how
polygamy
Canadians treat marijuana.
is permitted and practiced. And if you go to the Wikipedia page, I'll put a link in the show notes. Basically, most of Africa and the Middle East, and then looks like India, and I'm really bad at geography, but the country to the east of India. Do you
That'd
know?
be Thailand.
Thailand.
Or
Oh yeah, that's Thailand. Okay, and then like a bunch of
Myanmar.
islands around like New Zealand area are basically it's either illegal or like it happens. So it's illegal, but it happens. Like it's not criminalized
Right, yeah.
or it's permitted. So basically, like Africa, Middle East, and islands nearby is basically allowed. So, and then looks like in Western culture and Europe, Russia, Australia, and South America, it is illegal. So I was wrong about that. Global acceptance. Oh, although the Wikipedia page says global acceptance of polygamy is common. Out of 1,200-ish societies noted, 186 were monogamous. 453 had occasional polygamy, and 588 had more frequent polygamy, and 4 had polyandry. So yeah, I guess I wasn't completely wrong. It's common in a lot of societies.
Well, it's just like one of those things where sort of the Western tradition really sort of tried to label what it would be a human condition and a human issue and make it one way or the other.
Right. This is the whole thing we were talking about earlier with the laws being
Right.
one way, and we're like, well, if it works for your family, it really doesn't matter. Like if you have a family where there's 2 men and a woman, or like 2 women and a man, or more,
Right.
like maybe it's like 3 couples in a house, and they all do whatever they do, but like who cares? It doesn't really
Well,
matter.
this also ties into like what we would perceive about European culture versus American culture is that like American culture is very antagonistic when it comes to like issues like this, where they're like they definitely want to label it, define it, stick it in a box, and like have a lobbyist group, sort of saying that it's right or wrong, and like
Yeah.
everything becomes very almost politicized, but not in a good way, not in an actual like okay it becomes like it becomes more political rhetoric than it actually does become sort of foundational conversation pieces or topic pieces of like how people should live their lives.
Okay, so way back in the conversation. we've meandered. So, and I think that's fine. That's how conversations go.
Yeah, we tend to meander a lot, but we haven't really actually finished our obsession.
That's what I was going to go back to. Is so your obsession is kind of like, okay, there's a serious global impact of world wars and how it has affected culture, and obviously I think I wanted to at least bring it up.
Well, it's like what's a hard change, what's a soft change, like the way that we use like recreational drugs was sort of a soft change in the 1960s, but like as far as like World War II, it was really like a hard change in the sense that like a lot of things like changed as far as foreign policy or government structures or
Right.
Like culturisms.
And part of the reason I wanted to bring it up is because you were kind of bringing in it's kind of a in joke in our family that you always bring it up, and I wanted to put it on the table. Hey guys, it's probably going to come up if you listen to this podcast. Like,
yeah, well, also like I tend to ramble sometimes. I tend to rant, which you probably already noticed to some degree. And so, if someone gets sick of me rambling, or they see it coming, they're always like, "Oh no, he's going to bring up World War II."
Right.
And then I get all offended. I'm like, "What? I haven't mentioned it yet." Like no way there.
We're like, trust me, you will.
Yeah. You're like, keep talking, you'll get there.
Yeah.
So, but we haven't really talked about so most of your obsession with Harry Potter, as far as I understand it, is a very sort of personal awakening. Like,
I'm eager to hear like what the outside perspective of my obsession is,
and how you live your life. Like, that's as far as I know. Like, that's pretty much it. Like, and you have very direct ties. And for all of the listeners who don't know, Grant has decided several years ago to make the very sort of personal, impactful, and hard to reverse decision to demarcate his body with the symbol of his obsession. Would you talk about your tattoo?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll actually get to that in a minute. Yeah. So I think the Harry Potter series is probably, if not the most, one of the most impactful pieces of literature of human history. Okay. Now, a lot of people are going to be like, are you serious? Come on. It's like a kid's book. It's just a kid's book. It's just a popular thing. It's just like Twilight or anything else.
Okay, so personally, I don't do that same. Then I have to. I'm moving into a consideration where I'm questioning your. Okay.
I'll make my argument.
But I can understand. Like, a lot of people would basically look at any sort of fictional. I would say fictional literature, and not want to recognize that it had any impact, whether or not it did or not.
Right. Oh man, that really gets me in a tizzy. I'll tell you that.
Well, a lot of people are that way. You have to admit, like, it's a fictional piece of literature. It's had negligible influence.
I try not to think about those people. Anyway, so besides that, it is the best-selling book series in history, which it is. It's sold over 450 million copies of all of the books. Compared to how many books versus like how many copies, it's actually like a low number of books. Like if you look at this list on Wikipedia, I'll put a link again. The list of most sold book series. Most other book series on that top of the list have more than 10 books. Like R.L. Stine, Bernstein Bears, those are at the top of the list, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, so it's got a good few number of books versus how many it's sold.
Right, it's not someone just buying, the first book of the Winnie Pooh series sort of thing. And like where people, you're basically saying right now is that someone who has basically invested themselves in the first book is likely to own the second, the third, the fourth,
Yes.
and all the way through the entire series, where they have a complete collection.
Right.
Where it's not like a one-time sort of impact thing where they picked it up and they threw it away. Like they have the collection.
That's somewhat true. Although I want to say that on the top list of single books, like a single volume, it's like, I think it's number 4, is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone at 107 million copies sold. And like above that are like that whole list, like the top 10, there's no other books that are after 1940. Like all the
Right.
other
Okay.
books are like Charles Dickens and like Le Petit Prince, which is like a French book, and like it's old stuff.
Right, but let's yeah, and I actually would want to insert like basically the way pop culture has changed in the
Hmm.
sense that a lot of those books, like there was kind of a lack of supply. Like
Oh
back in the
yeah,
day, if you think about like
that makes sense.
what people would possibly consume versus what was available. You know, Charles Dickens was available, so pretty much everybody bought Charles Dickens. The same thing is true about like music nowadays. More people buy and listen to music now than ever in human history, sort of thing,
Right.
as far as their consumption of music.
Which is why Twilight is up there on that list.
Right, but the thing is that the best seller ever for music. I don't know if you know this is Bing Crosby.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, like the next person down the list is probably either the Beatles or Michael Jackson. I forget which one it is.
Right, right.
But it's because like
It's been a long
in the day
time.
in the day of the records, he produced so much records and he was the biggest selling artist.
Right.
And
Still sells.
how many people did he have to compete with him? How many genres were out there? Well, there was basically like 20 other people competing with him, but there was really only one genre at America in the time. There wasn't, there was basically jazz and swing and the crooners, and that was basically your three large genres of the time. And it just happened to be there was less variety available. So Bing Crosby will probably remain the best-selling artist of all time, which is kind of weird if you think about it, because until the population increases to such a high count where anybody can, just instantly have a best-selling record and beat out all other records, Bing Crosby will probably likely remain the top seller for the next 200 years just because of the way that the dissemination of popular culture media has happened. So what you're saying with your Harry Potter link is the fact is that like something has been able to break out of sort of the classical mold of actually competing with the classics that have been there and will probably remain up there just because their establishment in sort of pop culture history.
Right. Part of the reason that besides that it's, sold so many copies, so many people have been exposed to it. And I think there's something to be said about, just because something's popular doesn't mean it's meaningful or right. And I don't,
No.
I don't,
Yeah.
that's true, but like, I don't think that is the case here. So the, kind of like the 3 main themes of the series in order of like how prevalent they are in the series is like death is like the number 1 theory or theme, not theory, theme. Death's the number 1 theme. Prejudice is like the 2nd theme, and then corruption is kind of like the 3rd theme.
Okay, explain the corruption, because so
Sure.
for someone who's less familiar with Harry Potter like I am, I'm going to go ahead and say that the death theme is like very prevalent with like the spell of Avada Kedavra, which is the death spell, and then
Oh, you butchered that.
the looming possible death of Harry Potter and of his parents, and so death, yes, is easily seen for layman's process. For persecution, there's the persecution against the house elves and the mudbloods.
Prejudice, yeah.
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 But I guess as a person who's less familiar with the series, I'm trying to think of like
You're pretty
corruption.
familiar. You've
Yeah,
read
well,
them all.
I would say like if I had to go out on a limb, I guess the corruption would be the fact is the theories that Slytherin is harboring sort of,
No, that's the prejudice thing. So okay, so like you were saying,
or is it the fact that like the school had like eventually replaced the headmaster with
that is a small part. So obviously, death. You were saying, yeah, Harry's parents died. People in his life, some people in his life die, and then at the end, he kind of realizes he has to die, and so it's like it's throughout the entire series. And Prejudice is the second one, obviously. Yes, mainly the persecution of Muggles and Mudbloods, which are Muggles are non-magical folk, and like you and I. Okay, so the three main themes are like I was saying, death, right? Because you have Harry's parents, you have, like you were saying, Harry's parents and his looming death at the end. You have prejudice, which is yes, not only the house elves, which is something that a lot of people miss, but also like the Muggles, which are non-magical folk, and Mudbloods, which are people who are magical, but they were born into a Muggle family.
But you were saying that I was wrong about Slytherin, like that people like.
Well, the Slytherin thing is definitely more like Slytherins care about pure blood.
Yeah.
The Slytherins are all about that. The corruption part of the major theme, which is not. Like, it's the third theme, it's not the most prevalent one, is that the ministry is corrupt, right? Harry has to go to hearings where, like, the previous year, he did underage magic, and the Minister of Magic met up with him, like, later that day and was like, oh, it's no big deal, Harry, it happens all the time, and then lets him off with a warning and a pat on the head. And then in the next book, because he's kind of said, hey, Voldemort's returned, and the Ministry doesn't want to hear it, when he does underage magic by mistake, which is not allowed in this particular world, that he has to go to a very serious hearing where he might be expelled from school.
I can see how that would be impactful to the story, because it almost sets him as a vigilante in the sense that he has no social recourse but to basically take the fight himself and to basically be a leader and like not rely on other structures or institutions to basically seek justice or
right. So then, besides like that's before the second rise of the Dark Lord. After Lord Voldemort comes back to a body, and the Ministry won't believe him, then Lord Voldemort infiltrates the Ministry with Death Eaters. So there's corruption there as well. You have Death Eaters taking over the Ministry, and because of the system that's in place, it happens fairly easily. Like there's not good checks within the system of like, oh, are we being corrupt or not?
Right.
Are we corrupted by money? Which is also like Harry's childhood rival, Draco Malfoy. His father, Lucius Malfoy, is very wealthy and kind of like as a lobbyist type move, gives money to the Minister of Magic and the Ministry to kind of get his, whatever legislator he wants. He does that to get that in place. So
to have special interests,
Yeah. So like, I think these three themes are super important. Okay, so death is one that's obviously like everybody talks about it at some point in their lives, I hope, and it affects every human being. So it's really important to think about and like think about how much limited time you have and like what you do with that. I think that's really, really important.
Well, so on the first theme, I would say that as far as like something in pop culture that addresses that sort of theme, if you think about like other standards of like fictional and pop culture, would be like something like Tolkien or Star Wars, and like Tolkien did actually a pretty bad job, I think, as far as like addressing like human connections to death, because although it had the very fear of death, when I've read the books and when I've seen the movies, it didn't have as much
death. Sort of
the thing of like where it hangs over you as much as that like Harry Potter had a more strong sense of the fact that like almost it's mortality, that like mortality is something that everybody has as part of them.
Right.
It's like although people die and everything in Tolkien, and like it seems like you're going to have the internal. You always have like the idea of the eternal hero, and
Right, same with Star Wars, I would argue.
yeah, almost the same with Star Wars. Like, and like Star Wars, like, you know, it was very like, you know, when Obi-Wan died or something like that. It was very sort of like,
It's more metaphorical.
yeah, it was almost more metaphorical. While Harry Potter addressed, I guess I would say I would agree with that. That Harry addressed kind of the idea of mortality a little bit
Right.
more realistic in the sense that like everybody's going to die and everybody has the
Right.
possibility to die and everybody has to deal with how they think about it and feel about it.
I think that's important for all humans to think about. And then the other theme, prejudice. I think we're at a point in American culture, at least, where racism is unfortunately not gone, and it's
Right.
not something that is culturally impactless. It still is prevalent because it was only 50 years ago that any kind of legislation happened to get rid of that, and
Right.
slavery before that for many years, and also being a transgender person or being a gay person is also prejudiced against.
Or even gender roles and sexism, yeah.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I think those themes are addressed really, really well in the books. And then corruption is quite obvious. If anybody pays attention to the news, knows anything about Edward Snowden, for example, yeah, I think it's relevant. But there's also the obvious and most biasing effect that I grew up with the Harry Potter series, right? I started them when I was young. I continued them. Like, I was pretty much the same age as Harry when the books were coming out.
Yeah, I guess it's true. Well, it's a very formative sort of experience, yeah.
Yeah, so when I was 17, he was 17 type thing. So yeah, that's like, you're right about, you're right about like why it is one of my obsessions. Is because I think it's really relevant, and I think that besides it being a great story, that it has really important values that needed to be said in some way, and that's part of the reason why they've been so popular. Obviously, the hero's journey has like always been popular in stories, and like that's part of the reason it's been so well put into culture.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is sort of like when you're thinking about like corruption. I was thinking about like, I mean, a lot of, if you think about where popular culture is right now, there's sort of an unstated need about basically people are kind of like losing a faith like in systems and institutions of basically making reform, impactful reform. You know, there's a lot of deadlock in the governments around the world and stuff like that, and it really does reflect in our popular culture. Well, you have something like V for Vendetta, where he is really almost, he's protagonist antagonist in the sense that he is both the villain and the
hero.
The hero, yeah.
Yeah, so yes, leading up to that, I have a tattoo of the Deathly Hallows, which is an important symbol in the seventh book.
But it represents certain things, right?
It represents certain things to me, yeah, one of which being the death theme, is that I want to be aware of it. I want to be aware that the death could be lurking behind me at any moment, ready to come take me.
But that's not really any sort of morbid sensibility. It's really as a
It's more of a positive thing,
right. It's more of a like, you should make sure that you value the moment because you don't know when your mortality will assert itself.
Right, and that also leads into the fact that I want to be able to always accept that I will die and accept death as like, a thing that's going to happen to me. So yeah, that's why I got it. I got it for me, and yeah, I've read the books a lot.
Okay, yeah. So let's talk about how many times have you read like probably each book.
Okay, so let's talk about how many times I've listened to it via audiobook and how many times I've physically read it. So I most recently listened to books 1 through 6 all in a row. I tend to have long periods where I'm driving, or I will be doing stuff with my hands where I don't really need my brain. So I like to listen to audiobooks during those times. And so I listened to books 1 through 6. Before that, I read book 7 twice in a row. Before that, I read the series through 1 through 7 probably 3 times in a row, and that was just in the last maybe couple years.
Right.
So I know I've read the first book and the second book at least 40 times. And part of the reason that I've read the first few books more is because as they were coming out, I had read read one again. Read one again.
Yeah, right.
1, 2,
1, 2,
1, 2,
3.
and then 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. So, but that I've probably read them all independently, each around 30 times.
So I have a comment about consumerism at this point. I'd have to say that you really got your value out of your book, your hours of entertainment versus think of what we as Americans will spend on a night out at the movies, $20 a ticket, or we're gonna go snowmobiling. So we're gonna spend $50 in gas and $1,500 to $5,000 on a snowmobile.
Right, and I want to say that at least the first 4 or 5 books I didn't even buy. Right, my parents bought them. So
yeah, I guess you were young enough. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely got my use out of them, but
well, I'm just when it comes to consumerism, I'm always okay, well, what was your how you play a lot of video games, okay, for instance, have this kind of concept, and there's a lot of things that basically do this. It's not just video games, but they have the DPS, damage per second, right? Or if you talk about some sort of stocks, they'll have your dividends for your year or something like that. There's all kinds of things that have rates.
So it's like time per money type rate.
Yeah, so anything that rates, or YouTubers or Let's Players or other bloggers will basically be looking at connectivity for the length of the show, how long did people listen, or how many people did click on it. They're looking for click through rates, or looking at rates and everything like that. And so your comment of the fact that you've read your Harry Potter books makes me think of the consumerism, okay, so how many hours per cents did you spend on your entertainment?
Low cents for me, low cents.
Right. It's just okay, for every hour of entertainment, it costs you 1 penny or something.
Not even
that, right?
probably, yeah. Some people really don't understand this because they've never read any books that many times, I think.
Yeah.
But every time you read a book, you are essentially at least slightly a different person than you were before. You've learned more things about the world, and you see things a little differently. So every time you read a book...
it's one of those things where almost everybody I really associate with is a book reader, so I don't tend to think about this.
It's true. I've talked to other people about this. Every time you read a book, it is a different experience. Every time I've read Harry Potter, it's because my life is different, and because I've been older, I've gotten something different out of it.
Yeah.
So that's and of course I love the stories. That's why I've been able to not force myself to read it, but
Right.
enjoy it every time.
I wouldn't say that's limited to just books, but it's definitely more emphasized in books. You can watch a lot of people for instance, the Christmas classic, It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah.
They'll rewatch it because they get something out of it the 5th time they've watched it. Now I can't stand It's a Wonderful Life personally, but it's one of those things where it's an example of media does have that thing. It just happens to be that I have to agree with you. So as far as books go, I find that the density of contemplation is way more dense when I read a book, in the sense of what I get out of it and the value I get out of it is much higher than listening to Madonna for the 5th time, watching It's a Wonderful Life for the 6th time during the Christmas holiday.
Well, I mean, when you rewatch or listen to a form of media, that media is much, like you were saying, less dense. It's if you watch, Maggie's watched The Lion King like a ton of times, and she could probably say the whole thing word for word. But at that point, you've memorized the whole movie, and there's nothing like you forget about it. But books are dense enough to where you're not going to remember every detail. Like, I don't remember every detail from Harry Potter, even though I read it, 30 plus times. And I always read something, I'm like, oh, I totally forgot about that. So, obviously, I do remember a lot of it. But I couldn't tell you often in a single book, like if we take a random book out of there, like book 5 or 6, I couldn't tell you the story myself. Right? You could probably tell all of Lion King and not really miss any important details.
Right.
But it would be really hard for me to do that.
I could basically, maybe read the first paragraph of chapter 6 of book 5 in Harry Potter, and you'd be able to tell me what the chapter was about, paraphrasing, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to get all the tonalities and like the human possible things that people might get out of it for human thought and everything like that.
Right. But I might not even be able to do that with particular chapters. Like, I think we got to both of our obsessions, so I think it's about time to wrap this up.
Okay.
What do you think?
Keep it within a certain time period. Yep, I'm totally okay.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking for probably like an hour and a half, so.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, cool. Thanks for listening.
Yes, thank you for listening.
This has been a Gravity Well podcast. Thank you for listening, and have a lovely day. We'll see you next time.